We are here with our oldest and closest friends, Nicky and Sila Lee. I have known Nicky since I was 12 years old and he was 13. As you can see, he's a lot older than me. They took on the marriage course, which, as many of you will know, has gone all over the world. Millions of people have done it. Marriage course is not just for people who are struggling with their marriage, it's for everyone, including people who are struggling, but also people who have good marriages. And Bill and I have just done the marriage course online, and it had a very big impact on our marriage, and we recommend it to everyone. Anyway, we have the privilege of being here with Nicky and Sila and being able to ask them questions. So let's start at the very beginning.
Yeah, well, we met when we were teenagers. I was just 16, Nicky was 17, just left school.
With a car and a lot of hair. So
and we ended up in
photographs on the stage.
Yes.
We ended up in next door holiday cottages, invited by mutual friends. And I mean, it really was love at first sight, and then we started going out.
And when we came to faith, we had been going out for 18 months, madly in love, expecting, to get married eventually. And it was about 9 months after that when we both felt independently that if we were to put our relationship truly into God's hands, we needed to spend a bit of time apart.
I remember it so well because when I think about you, I always think about faithfulness and your faithfulness to each other over 7 years, but also your faithfulness to God. And because I remember how unbelievably hard that was for you at that moment.
Yeah.
I remember you coming back and saying you decided you were going to spend 3 months apart.
It was one of the hardest decisions, actually, of our life, wasn't it?
Really, what we knew was, though, that up until that point, we had each been the most important thing in each other's lives. Yeah. And in retrospect, too much. I mean, in too much intensity. But we knew that we needed to just build our relationship with Jesus and really give that our first commitment.
Also, I remember then somebody asked you to go to do something and you had to go through London where Sila was, and you had decided you was never going to go through London.
That was the last place I wanted to be because Sila was living there. We were at university. And then this friend, we went to play football, and on the way back, this friend said, I need to go via London in order to pick up something from home. That's where he lived. And I remember he dropped us, we were 3 other people, and he dropped us on High Street, Kensington, and said, I will pick you up from here in 20 minutes. And it was at that moment I looked up, and there, 50 yards away.
And how on earth did you got there?
It was walking towards me.
I was on a bus going to a Bible study, actually, and the bus got stuck in a traffic jam, and it was pouring with rain. And I just had this impression I had to get off the bus and walk the rest of the way. So I got off the bus, turned to my right, and there in front of me was Nicky.
Oh dear, I'm crying.
I know. And it was just this extra. I mean, I just screamed and ran to him. And
I abandoned my friends, and we just hugged on the pavement, High Street. I just swung Sila around.
But I think from that moment onwards, I mean, that was a chance.
It was a chance in a million. I mean, the chances of Sila, us both being at the same point, the chance of Sila getting off the bus, and at the end of those, by the end of those 3 months, we knew God was saying, it's right to be together.
I think I learned so much about God's faithfulness that actually I could trust the most important thing in my life, which was Nicky, into his hands, and he showed us his trustworthiness, his faithfulness, for that he has purposes and plans for good for us. And that totally changed my relationship with Jesus, that I trusted him, and I've trusted him ever since, that he has the best.
This season's been a very difficult season with COVID, and marriages have been under enormous pressure. How do people survive now in this season?
As you say, all relationships are really tested, and they can either be tested because you're in the same place together, so it's more intense. And it's like, I think through lockdown, it was like our marriages, our relationships were under a magnifying glass when we were together, and our differences, how we each want to relax, how we each want to plan, these differences are even more exacerbated and highlighted. But also, of course, if you're on your own, that is really hard. And again, finding the best ways to connect. And I think it's terribly important we find what works for us, whether that's as a couple or with friends. How do we connect? How do we keep the relationship growing?
And what would you say to somebody watching today who's actually going through conflict in either their marriage, or maybe it's in a flatmate that they've been sort of sharing so intently with? If they're in that stressful relationship, what would you say to them?
Well, I think one of the things is to take time when you actually identify what is the main cause of the conflict. Because so often there is an issue that gets bigger and bigger, and then all sorts of other things get drawn into it, and the main cause of the conflict, what the issue really is, gets lost. And I think you have to sit down, if you're together in the same place, sit down and each say, this is what I found really difficult, and then for the other person to listen, and both of you to do that. Then you can identify what the issue is. And we often talk about how these issues come between us and they stop us really connecting, stop us hearing or seeing each other. We have to take it from between us, put it out in front of us, and then we can start to look at solutions. What are we going to do? What changes are we going to make?
But also, I think we tend to assume we know what the other person is thinking. And actually, we don't know. I mean, we've been married for 44 years, and we don't know what
I'm still discovering things about Sila. It surprised me, astonished me.
But when when we may be anxious or stressed or confused or overwhelmed or I don't know, something, and actually to have your partner ask you, well, just tell me how you're feeling. I remember at the beginning of lockdown feeling kind of uncertain, unsure, and a little bit kind of what was it? I just felt a bit low.
Well, you said you felt as unsettled, and you couldn't quite work out why. You didn't know what it was.
And Nicky was amazing. We just sat down with a cup of coffee, and he just kept asking me questions and saying, well, perhaps it's this, or what do you tell me about that. I talked for about an hour. But by the end of an hour, I felt
I didn't have to say anything.
Completely fine. I felt completely fine. And it was simply that I couldn't work out what I was feeling. But I think when people are hurting, actually this thing of, and we talk about it and we practice it on the marriage course, the thing of expressing what's going on inside to our partner, and then have them listen, but then kind of say back to us. So you were feeling a bit kind of just like couldn't focus. If I've been yakking on about saying I can't focus, you just feel like you're not, and I'm going, yes, I don't focus. That's because he understands suddenly that I'm not feeling focused, and that can happen and work at every level of seeking to understand where your partner's coming from. And that makes an amazing difference.
So lots of people who are listening to this will be married, but a lot of people will not be married. And I think this is quite a tough time if you wanting to develop relationships, COVID-19, we're supposed to be apart.
There is still the potential to start to make relationships even in this time. And, again, it's coming back to the thing of seeing a connection with someone and then being intentional about building a friendship. And we would say, yes, don't allow this really challenging time to cause you to not reach out to someone else. Because I think ultimately we do all need to reach out.
Okay, now do you think there are any things that are common to all relationships? So like marriage relationships, dating, parent, children, friendships, like things that are like, again, give us 3 tips that relate to every single relationship.
I think the very first and the most fundamental is be interested in the other person. You've got to, because sort of, naturally we are so self-focused, but actually for relationships, we have to be interested in another person. And that holds true for friendships, holds true in a marriage, holds true in every relationship. And part of that is then asking them questions to draw them out, finding out their story, what it is that interest them, and so on. And you discover riches when you do that.
So number
Well,
two.
second, I would say, and it's a kind of follow on from that, which is effective communication. Because unless we actually understand what the other person is thinking and feeling, we can't build a relationship. And that's true in a marriage, with parent-child, with colleagues, with friends, and so on. And I mean, certainly, I think with the pressures and stress that, say, families are under, with children, parents in this lockdown sort of restrictive, I think the communication between parent and child, just taking time to listen to what a child is feeling, is thinking, is anxious about, but just communication, key.
Okay, genuine interest, effective communication. Number 3.
I would say number 3, I think this is the most important of all. Don't expect any human relationship to meet all your needs. Don't expect a marriage to meet all of your needs, all of your emotional needs, all of your needs in life. Only God can do that. And we know, marriages that have failed tragically because one partner has expected that the other one will meet all of their needs. They're going to they're going to love them perfectly. They're going to have this perfect marriage. As we said, there is no perfect marriage. We will never love each other perfectly. The only place we find perfect love is in God. And when we look to God for that ultimate fulfillment, then the rest of our relationships work. We take the pressure off them, actually, amongst other things.
Everything about your relationship seems to be like perfect. Your friendships, your children, everything's perfect. But actually, interestingly, your both, I think it's right saying both your parents didn't come from perfect marriages. And I love the story that you told recently about your grandfather.
Yeah.
Just say that thing about your grandfather.
When we came to faith in 1974, very soon after that, I thought I need to start praying for my family because I was so excited by what I discovered. And I thought I will start with the oldest member of my family because he will have the least time to respond to Jesus. And my grandfather was the one who had been divorced. He was in his second marriage. And then not many months later, he died. And I was disappointed because I saw no evidence at all that my prayers had been answered. But there was one thing. I remember going to the crematorium and the vicar, who was just on duty that day, because my grandfather wasn't a churchgoer at all, said about my grandfather that he wanted a reading from Ecclesiastes chapter 12, which started off, "Remember thy Creator in the days of your youth." And he said, I don't think this reading is appropriate, so I'm going to do a reading from John chapter 14. And I just sort of logged that, and later I went to read Ecclesiastes 12. And then it was several years later that we were staying with some friends many miles away, and we went to church with them on the Sunday morning. And the vicar had just arrived the Sunday before. He knew nobody. And at the end of the service, I found myself chatting to him. And I just said to him, literally to make conversation, "Where were you before you came here?" He said, "I was in a village called Shackelford." I thought, Shackelford? And I thought, I'll just see. My grandfather said, wasn't a churchgoer. I said, my grandfather lived in Shackelford. He was called Arthur Lee. Did you ever come across him? And this man paused for a moment. He said, yeah, I did actually. I did get to know him. And it was in the last weeks of your grandfather's life. He asked me if I would go and see him. And he said your grandfather would break down in sort of tears of remorse at things that he felt he'd made a mess of his life and things he got wrong. And then he said, the very last time I went to see your grandfather before he died, he asked if we could take communion together.
Amazing.
And I just knew at that moment that God had heard my prayers, and it was again, it was, even more so the meeting in High Street, Kensington, the chances of me talking to that man, that was the only man on earth who could tell me that God had heard my prayers about my grandfather. And I know one day I'll see him in heaven, and we can talk about those last few days of his life. And God does hear our prayers, and I think, it's God's faithfulness, isn't it?
So that was why he chosen those words. Remember your Creator.
And I think that was the message my grandfather had wanted to give to all the rest of his family. Don't leave it as late as I did. Start now. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth.
Yeah. Well, you definitely did that, and
I was a lot younger than he was, certainly.
And that's an amazing example. Yeah. Nicky and Sila Lee, great examples of faithfulness. Thank you so much.